Vernaccus and Bourlor by Tavi Dromio. Halgerd walked into the king's ham that lordous evening, his face clouded with sadness. When he ordered a mug of grief, his mates Garzag and Ziomara joined him with moderately sincere concern.
"What's wrong with you, Halgerd?"
asked Ziomara.
"You're later than usual, and there's a certain air of
tragedy you've dragged in with you. Have you lost money? Or nearest and dearest?" "I haven't lost any money," Halgerd grimaced, "but I've just received word that from my nephew that my cousin Aliak has died. Perfectly natural, he says. Just old age. Aliak was 10 years younger than me."
"Ah, that's terrible. But it goes to show that it's important to savor all of life's possibilities, 'cause you'll never know when your time is coming,"
said Garzag, who had been sitting at the same stool at the smoky cornerstone for the last several hours. He was not one cursed with self-awareness.
"Life's short, all right," agreed Ziomara, "but, if you'll pardon my sentimental thought, a few of us are aware of the influence we'll have after our deaths. Perhaps there's comfort there. For example, have I told you the story of Vernaccus and Bourlor?"
"I don't believe so," said Halgerd.
"Vernaccus was a Daedra," said Ziomara, throwing a few dribbles of flint on the hearth to cast the proper mood. "And though our tale took place many years ago, it would be fair to say that Vernaccus is still one. For what, after all this time, to the immortal Daedra?"
"Actually," Garzag interrupted, "I understand that the notion of
"I am trying to offer our friend an inspirational tale of his hour of need," Ziomara growled. "I don't have all bloody night to tell it, if you don't mind."
"You wouldn't have heard of Vernaccus," said Ziadra, abandoning the theme of immortality for the time being,
"for even at the height of his power and fame, he was considered feeble by the admittedly high standards of the day. Of course, his lack of respect infuriated him, and his reaction was typical of lesser Daedra. He went on a murderous rampage. Soon word spread through all the village of Colovian west of the unholy terror. Whole families had been butchered, castles destroyed, orchards and fields torched and cursed so nothing would ever grow there again. To make things even worse for the villagers, Vernaccus began getting visitations from an old rival of his from Oblivion. She was a Daedra seducer named Horavatha, and she delighted in taunting him to see how angry she could make him become.
"You flooded a village, and that's supposed to be impressive," she would sneer. "Try collapsing a continent, and maybe you'll get a little more attention."
Vernaccus could become pretty angry. He didn't come very close to collapsing the continent of Tamriel, but it wasn't for lack of trying. A hero was needed to face the mad Daedra, and fortunately one was available. His name was Bourlor, and it was said that he had been blessed by the goddess Kinnereth. That was the only explanation for his inhuman accuracy with his bow and arrow, for he never missed a target. As a child he had driven his marksmanship tutors wild with frustration. They would tell him how to plant his feet, how to knock a bolt, the proper grip for the cord, the best method of release. He ignored all the rules, and somehow, every time, the arrow would catch a breath of wind and sail directly to his target. It did not matter if the quarry was moving or still, at very close range or miles away. Whoever he wanted to strike with his arrow would be struck. Bourlor answered the call when one of the village mayors begged him for help. Unfortunately, he was not as great a horseman as he was an archer. As he rode through the forest toward the mayor's town, a place called Ivenzacon, Vernaccus was already murdering everyone there. Hordvatha watched and stifled back a yawn.
Marrying a small town mayor isn't going to put you in famous company, you know. What you need is a great champion to defeat. Someone like Verzagamor or Peleo Whitestrake or... She stared at the figure emerging from the forest. That fellow.
"Hey!" growled Vernaccus between bites of the mare's quivering body.
The greatest archer in Tamriel. He's never missed.
Bourlor had his bow strung and was pointing it at the Daedra. For a moment, Vernaccus felt like laughing. The fellow was not even aiming straight, but he had a well-honed sense of self-preservation. There was something about the man's look of confidence that convinced the Daedra that Horatha wasn't lying. As the bolt left the bow, Vernaccus vanished in a sheet of flame. The arrow impaled a tree. Bourlor stood and stared. He had missed a target. In oblivion, Vernaccus raged. Fleeing before a mortal man like that, not even the basest scamp would have been so craven. He had exposed himself for the weak, cowardly creature he was. As he considered what steps to take to salvage the situation, he found himself face to knee with the latest, most fearsome of the Daedra princes, Molag Bal. "I have thought anything much of you, Vernaccus," the giant boomed, "but you have more than proven your worth. You have shown the creatures among us that the Daedra are more powerful than the blessings of the gods." The other denizens of Oblivion quickly agreed, as they always did, with the view of Molag Bal. The Daedra are, after all, always very sensitive about the various defeats at the hands of mortal champions. Vernaccus was proclaimed the elusive beast, the unpursuable one, he who cannot be touched, the bane of Kinnereth. Shrines devoted to him began to be built in remote corners of Morrowind and Skyrim. Bourlor, meanwhile, now found flawed, was never again called to rescue a village. He was so heartbroken over his failure to strike his target that he became a hermit and never restrung his bow again. Some months later he died, unmourned and unremembered.
Is this really a tale you thought would cheer me? Asked Hagrid incredulously. I've never heard the King of Worms told more inspirational stories.
Wait, smiled Ziamara. I'm not finished yet. For a year's time, Vernaccus was content to watch his legend grow and his fledgling worship spread from the home in oblivion. He was, in addition to being cowardly and inclined toward murderous rages, also a very lazy creature. His worshippers told tales of their master avoiding the bolts of 1,000 archers, of moving through oceans without getting wet, and other feats of avoidance that he would rather not to demonstrate in person. The real story of his ignominious retreat from Bourlor was thankfully forgotten. The bad news, when it came, was delivered to him with some relish by Hoardvatha. He had delighted in her jealousy at his growing reputation, so it was with a cruel smile she told him,
"Your shrines are being assaulted."
"Who dares?" he roared.
"Everyone who passes them in the wilderness feels the need to throw a stone."
Wrath appeared.
"You can hardly blame them, after all. They represent he who cannot be touched. How could anyone be expected to resist such a target?"
Vernaccus peered through the veil through the world of Mundus and saw that it was true. One of his shrines in Colovian West Country was surrounded by a large platoon of mercenary soldiers who delighted in pelting it with rocks. His worshippers huddled inside, praying for a miracle. In an instant he appeared before the mercenaries, and his rage was terrifying to behold. They fled into the woods before he even had a chance to murder one of them. His worshippers threw open the wooden door to the shrine and dropped to their knees in joy and fear. His anger melted. Then a stone struck him. Then another. He turned to face his assailants, but the air was suddenly filled with rocks. Vernaccus could not see them, but he heard mercenaries in the woods laugh.
It's not even trying to move out of the way. It's impossible not to.
With a roar of humiliation, the Daedra bounded into the shrine, chased by the onslaught. One of the stones knocked the door closed behind him, striking him in his back. His face broke, anger and embarrassment disappearing, replaced by pain. He turned, shaking to his worshippers who huddled in the shadows of the shrine, their faith shattered.
"Where did you get the wood to build this shrine?"
Vernaccus groaned.
Mostly from a copse of trees near the village of Iviskakan."
His high priest shrugged. Vernaccus nodded. He dropped forward, revealing the deep wound in his back. A rusted arrowhead, buried in a whirl of wood of the door, had jolted loose in the assault and impaled him. The Daedra vanished in a whirlwind of dust. The shrines were abandoned shortly thereafter, though Vernaccus did have a brief resurgence as the patron spirit of limitations and impotence before the fading from memory altogether. The legend of Bourlor himself never became very well known either, but there are still some who tell the tale like myself, and we have the advantage of knowing what the great archer himself didn't know at his deathbed. The final arrow found its target, after all. And that was the story of Vernaccus and Bourlor.